Welcome back to Find Us Library and welcome back to Law Review. It's me, Dan Tripp. I know I always laugh through my intros. I think it's because I laugh at the concept of me doing this stuff. And I'm going to be talking about Fi today. So in the last video, we talked about Dramai. We went through Dramai's about story and first short story, and we're going to be doing the exact same thing for Fi. There's a lot of crossover between Fi and Dramai, so it's going to be pretty interesting to compare the two stories, because a lot of what's going on in Fi's first short story is the lead up to the second half of Dramai's first short story. So done them slightly out of order, but I just wanted to do Dramai first and Fi second. It's just what I wanted to do, so that's what I'm going to do. So there's a few things I wanted to talk about before we get stuck right into the lore, because I'm very aware that the last one of these went on for a while, and I fully intend for this one to do the same. Incidentally, this is my chance to ramble and go on and off on tangents as much as I like. So strap in. I want to shout out a couple of things. So the first thing is this Flesh and Blood lore website that a person from the community, Nathan Eastwood, made. Which I've been using for my research for these videos. So, but yeah, believe it or not, I do a little bit of research before I just jump straight in. I do read the stories first, and I found that this is a really good website because it has all the lore from the Flesh and Blood TCG website, but it's all split out into pages. It's super easy to find the stuff you need, and we've got like the main story here, like laid out kind of in the order it's been released. So you can see here we've got the One Emperor and all that good stuff. No pictures at the moment. I'm not sure if Nathan was considering adding the pictures, but to be honest, I don't actually mind there not being any pictures. I kind of just use this to quickly brush up on lore and quickly find things that I might be interested in. And yeah, as you can see, it's split out very similarly. So today for example, today we're going to be looking at Fire Rising Rebellion and Fires of Rebellion together. And we're just going to be covering that in this video. So yeah, I just wanted to shout this out. I generally just get this up on my phone, and if I'm on like the tube or something, or I'm commuting, or I'm on a train, it's really easy to just read some lore. So I'm much easier than using the Flesh and Blood website if you're just wanting to read. And I think that is super cool, and the way it's all split up and everything is really, really nice. So I wanted to shout that out. And I also just wanted to shout out my Twitter again. If you are interested in the lore content, I would really strongly recommend you follow me on Twitter. A lot of my content doesn't necessarily reach the people that are subscribed to me because I'm quite a small YouTuber. So the best way to keep up to date with what I'm doing is to follow my Twitter, which is at DJETrip. And you can keep track of everything I'm posting and all my new videos. So that is what I would recommend that you do. Bam. Okay. That's done. Let's talk about Fi. So, what to say about Fi? So, Fi is a Draconic Ninja. I personally play Fi quite a lot. I like playing Fi in draft because it's I'm not got a brain big enough to play Dramai and Icelander. But I also play Fi in CC, and I really like the ninja playstyle. I used to play Ira all the time, and it's been really fun to start playing a new ninja hero with Fi. But we're not talking about playing the game. We're talking about the lore. This is about the lore. So I may touch upon a few gameplay things, but this is entirely about the lore. Okay, so let's just get stuck in, because I think last time we got a little bit distracted. But we will cover a Fi and what he's about. So Fi is the sort of she's not really the step brother or even half brother of Dramai. So Dramai and Fi sort of were raised together as siblings, but they don't have a blood relation, because Dramai was taken away from her parents and raised by Fi's mother, who Dramai describes as Min the murderer. But as we will see in the story, that might not be the case. I think it basically isn't the case. There's a chance that Min murdered somebody else, but she doesn't sound like the most murderous of women, so you never know. And on the main story page, we have this about section, which gives us a very brief overview of Fi. Basically, Fi is one of the rebel leaders. I think by the end of his stories, I think you could probably describe him as the leader of the rebels, the sole leader. But there's a possibility that actually he serves under somebody else. not sure if that will be clarified in the second short story. I can't quite remember, but he's a leader of the Volkai, right? So he's part of the Volkai, which, as we established in the other video, are sort of a group of people that live in Volkor that are sort of ruled by the Drukai. So as it says here, Fires long witnessed the suffering of the Volkai, heard the lash of whips, felt the ache in his belly from days without food. So essentially, he is part of this group of people that are sort of subjugated by the Drukai. And the Drukai are like the Emperor, Kano is a Drukai, and Dramai becomes a Drukai as well. Talks about him killing, the first man that he killed was a soldier guarding a caravan of silks. So silks bound for the royal court of Ashfahan, so that's where the royal court is. And essentially he's part of this rebellion that sort of is kind of acting like does banditry in order to fund the rebellion, essentially stealing from the Imperials. So, for example, taking silk from this caravan, going to the royal capital. And then to the raid leader, he proved himself to be the fastest and fiercest ninja on the field of battle. So, Fires is described as a ninja. He's not a ninja from Mysteria. That's it seems to be like a different group of ninjas that live in Volkor, and ninjas that live in Mysteria, which is another place within Wraith. So Mysteria is where Katsu and Benji and I believe Ira are from, and yeah, we're not going to go into detail of that now. But yeah, that's just to clarify that there are multiple sort of, you can be a ninja and not be from Mysteria, which is kind of a thing that Fab has been pushing, the idea that classes aren't necessarily tied to particular areas. Like you have an illusionist from Solana and an illusionist from Volkor, and we might get an illusionist from Aria as well. So just bear that in mind. He's a flesh and blood hero, so he has to be pretty good. He's the fastest and the fiercest. And it's just saying that they sold the silk essentially to save the village from starvation. It's classic freedom fighter, banditry, doing bad things to do a good thing. The end of saving the village justifies the means of killing and robbing the Imperials. So yeah, guided by his mother's wisdom, his mother being Min, Vi brings bloody justice to the selfish and the cruel. He strikes with the blistering speed of the phoenix and burns his cause into the hearts of friends and foes alike. So he's a bit of an inspiration to the rest of the rebels. A cause that will see Volkai and Drukai stand together. Because it's actually quite important. He strikes with blistering speed of the phoenix and burns his cause into the hearts of friends and foes alike. A cause that will see the Volkai and the Drukai stand together instead of tearing each other apart. So essentially, he's trying to overthrow the Emperor, and it suggests here that some of the Drukai may join him in this. It says here that foes, his cause is burned into the hearts of foes, and it's a cause that will see Volkai and Drukai stand together, and that's really interesting. And when we start reading the story, we'll see that Fi is keen for the Drukai to see the way the Volkai live and essentially influence the Drukai and get them to join with him in overthrowing the establishment. And that links quite closely to Dramai's parents, who were, one was a Drukai and one was a Volkai. And so that's kind of like a thing that's going on, and that may cause tensions amongst the Volkai, who, some of which, as we will see in the story, just want to kill the Drukai and don't really see the point, I guess, of bringing some of the Drukai on board, or just don't trust the Drukai to join their cause. And we'll have a quick look through the hero highlights. I think this is really interesting, the Phoenix Rising bit where it talks about these molten cleansing events. So instigated by the Imperials, they routinely raise the settlements of the Volkai people. So it's just pretty terrible, right? They essentially will occasionally just raise an entire village to the ground through what's described as a molten cleansing event. I assume that's using lava to melt away these settlements, which is really terrible when you think about it. I suppose if a Volkai settlement is getting too strong, or the the people, the Volkai people in that settlement are getting too strong, they will literally go and burn it to the ground, which is pretty terrible. But it says here, Phoenix will always rise from the ashes. Talks about Fire's hero ability, which represents that. Talks about how the Volkai are regularly beaten and burned by their imperial oppressor. You see that in one of the cards, Brand with Cinderclaw. But the bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood will never be broken. So yeah. Talks about it's mainly gameplay related, and then there's not a huge amount down here on the cards. Like with Dramai, we had all the dragons to go through. It talks about Fire being a hot-headed ninja. I actually find this description quite interesting. When you read the short stories of Fire, like he doesn't actually come across as that hot-headed. Like he actually comes across as quite balanced, and his raising from his mother Min has taught him some like quite valuable lessons about bringing the Drakai and the Volkai together. So I'm not actually I think this is an example of, you know, that he's obviously related to fire and flames, and you know, we call him a hot-headed ninja, but actually I think you'll find when you read the story that Fire is actually quite balanced and quite his raid leader Un is actually way more hot-headed than Fire. So I don't think this is necessarily the most fair description of Fire. But he does spearhead the uprising against Draconium. And maybe in the future, Fire will become more and more blinded by violence as he increases his challenge to the Drakai. Maybe we haven't seen that yet. We have the young Fire, which has a very similar story to the young Dromai. Let's click that forward. Talks about games of chase through the forest of flames, but the rest aren't too interesting. Searing Ember Blade, I think, is quite interesting. The rest aren't interesting, but this one is interesting because it's a blade, and it says here that it was forged from the blood that flows through the lava veins of the Volkai. So we talked in the previous video about how the blood of the Drakai, like, actually it's described as like steaming when it comes out and hits the ground. Whether that's like a joke or not, it's not, I guess, 100% clear, but that is what it says. And here we get another thing. Here we were talking about the blood of the Volkai and how this is forged from the blood that flows through the lava veins of the Volkai. So it's almost like there's this emphasis on blood for both the Drakai and the Volkai, and I think that's kind of interesting. This might be a metaphor, just saying it's forged from the blood that has been spilt in the name of the Volkai, or it could be a literal, could be literal because it's fantasy universe, right? Who knows what's going on? And the rest are mainly gameplay related without too much to speak of. Tome of the Firebrand does mention scripts seared in parchment telling teachings of the Great Flame Wave. There's another attack called Engulfing Flame Wave. So it's kind of interesting. I guess I feel like I say kind of interesting quite a lot in these videos, so apologize if you picked up on that. But yeah, there may be something related to the tome at some point. But it's not doesn't have too much detail there. There's not a huge amount of additional lore here. So yes, great. We raced through that. That was great. We were making way better time than we did last time. So let's move on now to the story section. So there's a little bit of additional lore, as always, before we get to Fires of Rebellion. And there's some interesting stuff here, and it does cover some of what we talked about in the previous video. So life was never easy in the Forest of Flames. So it spoke on the previous screen when we looked at the young Fi that Fi and Dramai used to sort of run around the Forest of Flames, like playing games. That's where Fi essentially grew up, and farmers and foresters eked out a meager living from the land, barely making enough to feed their families once the Emperor's tax collectors had taken their due. I just want to quickly, before we get stuck into this, I just want to check the Volcor page on if there's any additional information, because sometimes we get information about different parts of the place. I wonder if there is anything on the Forest of Flames. No, there's not, unfortunately. It's always worth checking if there's any like additional info. You know, here it talks about it's rumored that dragon blood lies in their veins, for example, for the royal bloodline, and it talks about lava flows. Yeah, and it's can isolate territory. But anyway, let's not get, we can go off on many tangents if we wish, but we'll save that for later. Yeah, so they live in the Forest of Flames, and Fi's mother, Min, spoke of a better time when Volkai and Drakai would walk the roads of Volkor hand in hand, ruling the empire as equals. So that's interesting. In the past, that the Volkai and the Drakai ruled together. I wonder how long ago that was. If she, presumably, well, not presumably, it may have been within the lifespan of Min, but it could also just be the tales that she's heard. But Fi wasn't really listening, says here, to what his mother was saying. He was too busy playing minion to his sister's mastermind. So, well, Dromai drew the eye with monsters of wonders and ash and soot. Fi applied his swift-handed feat to stealing, and he was stealing sort of food and then giving, but he was giving away the food to the poorest of the village. So classic Robin Hood style. And this is obviously a reflection of what he's now doing in his later life. He's stealing from the Imperials and giving them to the poorest, who are the Volkai. But what else could he do? Min had taught him that life was never fair by nature, only by practice. Yeah, interesting philosophical view there. So saying that life is never fair with nature, you have to practice fairness. Yeah. Then the Drakai brought his soldiers and burned their village, forcing Fi and Min to flee into the forest with their kith and kin. They lost many good people that day, his sister among them. As we know, actually these soldiers were specifically searching for Dromai because of her powers. And it says apparently life wasn't fair. So from that day forth, Fi started listening to his mother's words, vowed to forge her dreams with fire and steel. He trained to the breaking point, he fought until he bled. Loss made him listen. A fair life was a right, not a privilege. So this is kind of Fi's philosophy here, that he believes that everyone has a right to a fair life, and it shouldn't be a matter of privilege. So obviously the Drakai have not just a fair life, but a pretty good life, but the Volkai don't. So Fi is trying to sort of level the playing field. And he would rise from the ashes of his childhood with a brand that lesson upon... he would rise from the ashes of his childhood and brand that lesson upon the soft and pampered skin of all Drakai. So, this is, again, it talks about Fi wanting to sort of brand the skin of the Drakai, the soft and pampered skin of the Drakai. And I just don't think we see this in the current story, and it makes me, this attitude, I think maybe it's something that might come in the third short story, because Fi is pretty chill to the Drakai. He wants to... We'll get to this in the story, but Fi doesn't want to... He talks about capturing the Drakai and making them see the world that he sees. And he talks about wanting to bring Drakai on board with his cause and not just killing them. So these lines where he says that he's sort of hot-headed and he will sort of brand upon the soft and pampered skin of all Drakai, it gives off an impression that I'm not sure plays out in the stories necessarily, of this violent, vengeful man. But maybe this is what's coming in the third short story. But let's get stuck into the story, and then we'll see what your impression is of Fi, because I think that there's this assumption that he's sort of vengeful and violent, and actually we'll see that he's actually quite balanced. Okay, so Fires of Rebellion. This is the first short story, so we're just going to run through this. And there's a few things in here that I think are quite interesting. The story links up quite closely to what happens in Dromai's first short story, but this first bit is kind of giving a bit of backstory to Fi and his relationship with Un, the silver-haired ninja. So in Dromai's story, Un is, or Un, I should say, I think it's Un, is referred to as the silver-haired ninja. There's no clarification that that they are the same person. They're definitely the same person. So Un is talking to Fi. They're essentially talking about whether these farmers that they are amongst at the moment will fight with them against the forces of General Riku. So this is happening before General Riku has been captured, and this is essentially how General Riku is captured by Fi and Un. So they're just talking about whether they will rise up with them, and Fi basically says we've given them food, we've given them hope, so they should rise up. But Fi wasn't as confident as he makes out to be, but he's basically relying on his mother's teachings, so perhaps he doesn't quite. He believes in what his mother has told him, that bravery is in the belief, in hope and things like that. And he might not fully, completely believe that himself at this point, but he's confident in his mother, even if he isn't confident in himself. And Ern jerks out her thumb at the stack of sacks behind them, the tree and coin mark of the Golden Orchard Estate. Basically, Ern is a lot more sort of, I don't want to say realistic, but cynical. Cynical is the word. She essentially says, we've given them stolen rice, and made them accomplices by giving them stolen rice, and says that in the eyes of the Imperial Court, they are basically as good as dead. And then Fi says that she has another saying, which is courage is born with choices die. It's an interesting statement. I assume this refers to the fact that these villagers had no choice. Essentially, their choices died. They're starving. They didn't have any choice about eating this rice. Otherwise, it's a choice between eating stolen rice and starving to death. But Fi says courage is born when choices die. I don't want to get stuck into a huge philosophical debate about the nature of courage, but I don't actually agree with the statement. Courage relies on choice, in my opinion. If you have no choice, you can't be brave. You just have, courage is when you have choices that you can make and you choose to make a more difficult choice that is the better thing to do. So actually, I wouldn't necessarily say that courage is born when choices die. I think courage relies on there being a choice between two options, one of which is perhaps easier, but the other is harder, but is the right thing to do. Anyway, don't want to get stuck in. This is not philosophy 101. It could be if people want that, but not right now. And they sort of just chat to each other. They just say they could have turned us in. They still might. Fi is saying no, they'll rise, and he essentially says something that his mother says. Generals have bled our people dry, while the Drakai live their bright and comfortable lives. We are a spark that will ignite a million fires. The Drakai will be forced to leash their infernal hounds to govern with care, lest they face the full fury of the Volkai. So this is a really interesting line. It's attributed to Min, because Un says, well done for remembering your mother's speech. The implications of this speech is that Fi is not yet saying that he is going to completely remove the Drakai from power. If you actually look at what he says that the Drakai will be forced to leash their infernal hounds. So that, by my interpretation, that means the Drakai will be forced to rein in their more extreme elements, the individuals amongst the Drakai that are going out and doing dreadful things, essentially saying that those people will need to be reined in and they will need to govern with care. So there's no actual statement here that the Drakai will stop governing. It says here they have to govern with care, but if they don't do that, they will face the full fury of the Volkai. So I think that's really interesting that at this point, Fi, or perhaps Fi through his mother's statement, is that this is not an overthrowing of the Drakai, it is a reformation of the Drakai, which links it closer to Dramai's aims to become, essentially Dramai wants to become emperor, become more powerful, to reform the status, reform the current way of government within Volcor. And Fi is spouting this as well. And I wonder if we will see Fi move from the thoughts of his mother about reforming the system to a more radical bringing the system down. And that's kind of what he's suggesting. If the Drakai won't change, then the Volkai will make them change. Anyway, Un claps her hands, slow and sardonic. I've never heard the word sardonic before, but it's pretty cool. I would probably just use the word sarcastic. Well done for remembering your mother's speech. Fi says, you don't believe it, and Un says, when I see it, boy. So Un is very cynical. Un doesn't necessarily... Un is an interesting character. We'll learn more about her as we go through the story. So the hours crawl by, restless yet sluggish, like a river of lava. That is incredibly hard to say. Restless yet sluggish. This is Fi's first mission for the rebellion. So this is early on in Fi's days. The raids against Phelan's caravans and estates were a gathering of kindling. Here the spark will take, the fire will bloom, the fighting man in him boils with excitement, ready to pour all of his anguish, all of his anger upon these imperial oppressors. So yeah, I said earlier that maybe that Fi was quite balanced. We did say here he's got anger. You know, he's channeling that anger in his anguish. The frightened boy in him thrashes against his resolve, aching to flee back to Taking or Tao King, to hide amongst the glowing trees of the forest of flames and never come out. So he's afraid. You know, he's a young lad. He wants to fight, but he's scared. He doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to be killed. Doesn't want to be hurt. You know, normal human emotions. And it's almost a relief when he sees the dust cloud in the distance. Almost a pleasure to see General Riku's vanguard poke its head like a giant black snake out of the foothills. So he does want his merchant back, says Un, and Fi glances at the bound and gagged woman, Phelan, purveyor of coal and rice, a woman of gold, living off the salt of her serfs. So essentially they've captured this merchant, this they say earlier the raids against Phelan's caravans and estates. So presumably Phelan is a merchant that owns a set of caravans, that does business, takes goods to the royal capital, and they've captured her, which is and they're using that to lure out General Riku. And they say money talks when reason falls silent. Well, Fi says money talks when reason falls silent. And Un says another of Min's bloody sayings, and Fi says, no, one of mine, then you're smarter than you look. There's a bit of back and forth between Un and Fi. And Fi says he remembers his lessons. He feels the scar on the side of his face, the burn, inflamed like his village the night Riku's soldiers took Dramai, and the night he fled with the survivors into the forest. The thoughts of his sister only fans the flames of his anger. His sweating palms itch, yearning for the grip of his sword, but he breathes through the smouldering emotions, forces himself to calm. This is what I'm saying, like he is hot-headed, I guess, because he feels this anger, but like, wouldn't all of us feel this kind of anger? And actually, he brings himself back down. He breathes, he makes himself calm. It's actually quite, he seems to be quite well in control of his anger and rage. And you know, you would be angry and you would be, against your oppressor, but actually he controls himself, and he keeps himself cool. They have to listen to us, the people, and the admiration fades from Un's grey eyes. I take it back, you're as dumb as you are ugly. Bit harsh, Un, but also very true. This is pretty naive. They have to listen to us, the people. I mean, it's obvious that that's not the case. You've been oppressed for your whole life and they've never listened to you before. Why would they necessarily start now? But Fi says, we capture General Riku, we use him as a bargaining tool in our negotiations with the Emperor. That's the plan. Un draws her sword, tests the edge with her thumb, and Fi says, you hear me? And she shrugs. I hope and we talked about this in the other video, I hope he's bringing some Drakai with him. Did you know dragon blood steams as it spills? And something furtive flickers in Un's eyes. So I'm told. Interesting statement. Firstly, suggests that Un is trying to make out that she's never actually seen the blood of the dragon blood spill on the ground. And spoiler alert, we find out later that Un has actually killed a Drakai, and she knows this firsthand, but she's pretending that she doesn't know it firsthand. She said, so I'm told. So interesting. Wonder why she would say such a thing. We'll find out in the next video. There's more she's not telling him. Yeah. Okay. Come on. We don't need to say that. We can, I think the reader doesn't need to have that spelled out to them. But 5 figures now is not the time to pry. If there are Drakai, we take them alive. They must see how we live, how we suffer with their own eyes. Torvai changed, so can they. So Torvai was Dramai's father, who was a Drakai, who changed, who came and lived with the Volkai. But Un turns away from him, seizing up the approaching army, and says, Torvai was a dangerous fool, and she carves a lazy figure of 8 in the air. There are many roads to Ashfahan, Fi. The trick is not to die before you get there. And Fi says wasn't playing too good. So, but back to this Torvai bit. So Un is very much not on the bring the Drakai into the fold kind of thing. She seems quite obviously cynical about that and thinks of Torvai as a dangerous fool. The bringing in the Drakai into the mix of the Volkai was a mistake, and may have brought them more danger by doing so. Which you could argue is the case. They wait for Riku's army. They settle in, take up key positions. They wait until Riku's army sort of settle down to make camp, and then they throw off their Centauri disguises. So they're disguised as the Centauri right now, much like we hear about the Centauri sabers. Mercenary allies turning to zealous enemies. So the Centauri presumably are mercenaries allied with the Drakai, and they've disguised themselves as the Centauri to fool them. Farmers pounce from hatch and hole, using their knowledge of the land to throw their unwitting visitors into chaos. They're ambushing the Drakai, right? And you know they're here to capture Riku, and as we know from Dromai's story, they're successful in that. And Fire and Un, they charge with their ninjas. They attack, they stab, they do all sorts of ninja stuff. Yeah, they're kind of actually sort of killing these guys, not in cold blood, but like, you know, they're frightened faces, screaming throats, blades sliced through raised wrists and craning necks. Interesting. Why are their wrists raised? Are they trying to surrender? Are they raising their hands up and they're killing them anyway? But, you know, the soldiers start to fight back, and for every soldier they kill, farmers are dying. They can't, you know, match the rigors of military training. They, you know, friends and families fall. Some of the farmers are surrendering and running, and Fi's ninjas are being left to face the Imperial soldiers alone. Un's basically saying these guys are cowards because they're trying to surrender. But Min's words ring through the din of battle, I presume, in Fi's head. Bravery is the belief. So Fi chops a man's head off. And then he sees the general, and he basically charges towards the general. Assumably he remembers. So this is him remembering the face, the gleam of the Imperial Dragon on the golden breastplate. He remembers the flames of his burning village reflected in the dark eyes of General Riku, and he charges towards him, bringing his ninjas alongside. He feels rather than sees Un as the rebels fall in behind him, and their courage fuels his own, and they leap once more into the fray. And blooded Imperials tumble to the ground. Fi's fighters slash a path through the melee. They don't stop, they don't pause for breath. And he's basically right up close to General Riku. They've basically done a charge towards Riku. He's the one they want to capture. They're kind of losing this battle, so they need to take out the general. General Riku says, "Where are those bedamned Drakai?" Kind of interesting that General Riku would say that, because I assume that Riku is a Drakai. I guess he's like saying, where are the other Drakai? Because he's not got an AI suffix to his name, so I presume that Riku is a Drakai, but there aren't any other Drakai with him. It's a desperate screech from Riku to a lieutenant, and Fi sees fear in the general's eyes. But he's stopped from surging forward by a giant bodyguard who growls like a char bear, swings with fire with a broad-bladed battle axe. Fi spins away, but the big guy's faster than you think. The axe tip scores a searing line across Fi's side. Incidentally, they seem to have misspelled axe, but they've done it consistently. So maybe in Volcor, that's how you spell axe. It's just AX. That's kind of interesting. Yet the pain only serves to drive the battle weariness from Fi's limbs. And basically, he comes up with a clever idea. He feints high and then just drives his sword through the bodyguard's thigh, gets it stuck, and then he, in a major ninja trick, jumps off the, sort of steps onto the sword handle and jumps up the man climbs him like a tree, and then jumps onto the back of Riku's horse and essentially gets his knife out, gets it to the general's throat, and he says, "I'm willing to die for my people. Are you?" And then Riku says, "Lay down your weapon." So yeah, he's got on Riku's back, and he's threatening to kill Riku. And Fai's made a bit of a judgment call here that Riku wouldn't just be like, "Yeah, whatever, I'll die for the Drukai." But no, Riku doesn't want to die, so he says, "Lay down your weapons." And the soldiers surrender. Fai says that he can see relief in the soldiers' eyes. They didn't want to fight this fight any more than the farmers did. Perhaps some had cousins here, even brothers and sisters. The only difference between fighters and the farmers is whether they carry a halberd or a hoe. I think that's interesting. So I guess that one way out for the poverty of the Volkai may be joining up with the Royal Army. We don't know, not all of... There aren't that many Drukai. Like, it's a small group of individuals with this dragon blood. So the army presumably has to be populated by Volkai. And maybe that's, that's why I thought maybe Riku might be Volkai, but he doesn't have the naming convention. But yeah, they are family, and they have to subjugate their own people, presumably. But anyway, Fai escorts Riku to the hilltop camp. Farmers and soldiers turn to the work of gathering and burning the dead. Becomes a shared chore. Most of these soldiers were farm folk once. It is an easy return to their roots, instinctual and welcome. Only a few need to be bound and watched. The city-born officers groomed from birth to serve the draconic code. So yeah, I guess there's like an officer class, and they might be more tied to the Drukai, might even be related to the Drukai, or they just born in the city. They are higher, like sort of more noble. But again, I thought the whole point was that the Volkai had AI naming conventions, but will remain to see, because obviously the merchant was called Phelan. But she might not actually be from Volcor. So she's from the Golden Orchard Estate. So we don't know necessarily where she's from, but it is a presumption that the actual the soldiers are Volkai. And they build funeral pyres. They work until dusk. A scream from the hilltop. So they're basically performing funeral rites and burying the dead, but at dusk Fai hears a scream from a hilltop, and he runs through the camp. And he keeps running, keeps hearing screams. And then Phelan, final scream is cut off as Un runs her blade across the merchant's throat. So Un's basically killed Phelan, the merchant, in cold blood. And blood gushes over Un's knife hand and down the woman's plush ash fur coat. Her painted eyes lose their luster, and the richest woman in the East topples onto the dirt. Well, there you go then, I guess. She's from the East, not necessarily from Volcor, and she is the richest woman in the East. That's pretty big. But anyway, so nearby Riku howls through his gag and struggles with his bonds. Fai says, no, this is the way of revenge, not revolution. Again, just pointing out that although Fai clearly has anger issues, he's not for this kind of thing. He wants a revolution. He doesn't want to become like the Drukai. He points down the hillside at the toiling Volkai. Our numbers have already grown. Word is spreading. But Un says, what better way to write those words than in blood? Let the Drukai read their doomed futures in freshly gutted entrails. Un is metal AF. She's just sinks her knife into the woman and opens her up from flank to flank. So crazy. She killed this woman in cold blood, and now she's cut open her stomach and let her entrails fall out. Obviously, Riku is right there. She might be doing this just to scare Riku and get knowledge from him. Fai looks away as the gorge rises in his throat. Un laughs as she kneels beside the general and cleans Phelan's blood from her knife with Riku's cloak. Fai's probably not see anything like this. This is this apparently is his first mission, and he's just seen Un cut a woman's throat and cut her stomach open, which is really, really disgusting, to be honest. And yeah, it must be pretty weird seeing someone that he presumably thinks of as a friend and ally, acting basically like a psychopath. Fire looks away. Yeah, he looks away. Yeah, and Un laughs and cleans Phelan's blood from her knife using the general's cloak, which is actually pretty badass, to be honest. But yes, she says, too disgusted to hear what I had to say. Fire says, you tortured her. She would have told you anything to make you stop. But Un stands and shrugs, sounded true to me. She recites the list of names and homes of the Drakai that Phelan had taken an interest in, but the most important one she keeps to last, and that is Dramai. So Dramai is a yeah, so there's a little inconsistency here. So it says here that she recites a list of the names of homes of the Drakai. And then she says Dramai, but Dramai is not actually a Drakai at this point. As we established in the previous video, Dramai is seeking to become a Drakai at this point, and she achieves it by saving General Riku. So if we go back to here, yeah, find Riku, I'm pretty sure it says this, right? Yeah. I'm sure it says somewhere that she will become a Drakai if she succeeds this mission. I just want to double check before I make a mistake. Yes, so here we go. I was right. Here we go. They're searching for General Riku because the rebels are captured. If you bring him to the palace alive and well, and continues Zatharai, we will declare you Drakai. But here it's saying in Fires of Rebellion that Dramai's list is on the list of names of homes of the Drakai. So it's a little bit of an inconsistency there. Maybe Phelan assumed that Dramai was a Drakai, being a bit generous there, but it's a possibility, I guess. But it does seem like it's unclear at this point whether Dramai was a Drakai before she saved Riku or whether it was afterwards. It's very Cinema Sins. I don't really care, but it's just worth pointing that out. But yeah, this is a slap to Fi's face. His scars burn hot in his flesh. You know where she is. And says, I told you there are many roads to Ashvahan, boy. She points her bloody dagger at General Riku. The trick is knowing who to kill to get there. And that is the end of the story. Jeez, we raced through that in comparison. I mean, it was still it's still nearly 50 minutes, right? To cover that. But just to go over the story, I think it's kind of interesting. I do, again, think it's not really drawing the view that Fi is this hot-headed ninja. I actually think that Fi comes across very balanced in this view. He's against killing the merchant in cold blood. He wants to capture Drakai so that they can learn how they live. I think, yeah, if they're a Drakai, we take them alive. It doesn't really suggest this super vengeful ninja, and I wonder if that's something we're going to get to later in the story, in the short story that's yet to be released. We've obviously got the Phoenix and the Dragon coming up, and we're also going to be looking at the same time Betrayal, because those two stories are very well linked. So we'll be covering those at the same time in the next video, the next Finals Library lore review. I personally quite like the story of Fi. I think I prefer the writing of Dragons of Empire. I think they're all written by the same people, Edwin McCrae and Rachel Reese, and it's the same for Fi. Yes, same writers. I think personally I enjoyed Dragons of Empire a lot more. I liked the war, the illusionary war, and the battle of the dragons against the illusionists. I really liked that bit, and I liked. I think Dramai's motivations are really interesting. I like her character. I think her character is quite fun, and I like the way she looks out for herself. Fi, I think, is a bit more. I think they've tried to give him this illusion of being like a bit of an anti-hero, but actually I think he's a bit of a just a bit of a hero. He's fighting for good. He's trying to feed the poor. He's angry at his allies when they do bad things. But actually he just doesn't come across as layered as Dramai does. But that isn't to say I didn't enjoy the story, and I think that the story of Fire is really interesting. And it gets and the follow-up in Betrayal and the Phoenix and the Dragon are really cool too. So we're going to be talking about that in another video, in the next video that I do. And I think we will wrap this one up here. Again, I hope you've enjoyed listening to me ramble about the story, going through it, talking about my views on the lore. Again, I want to say I do think the lore has improved a lot since Tales of Aria, just because of the characters. I think Dramai adds so much to the story. I also think Icelander adds a lot to the story. I'm looking forward to going through Icelander's stories as well. Fi, I think, is interesting. I think we could do more with Fi. I think we could take Fi down a much darker path in terms of his motivations too. He seems a bit tied at the moment to the idealism of his mother. Fi is very, very much put in the middle of the idealism of Min compared to the cynicism of Un. And I don't think there's much room for him to emerge from that. It's like the idea is he's tied between two different ideologies, but he's not really that tied to Un's ideology. It doesn't seem to have much impact on him yet. And it ends up not. More few spoilers for the next stories, in my opinion. But, you know, I think it's still a good story, and I enjoy reading these ones. I'm really looking forward to more on October 31st when we get those follow-ups. But there's going to be I said it already, but I'll say again, we're going to do the second story for each of these heroes together in the next video, the next episode of Lore Review. So really looking forward to talking about that with you guys. And again, any feedback, feel free to share in the comments below. I personally really enjoy doing these videos. I'm just going to keep doing them because I just love chatting about the lore, and in this kind of free form, no script format where I just work through the stories and just talk about what I want to talk about. And they're also very easy to edit and produce, so I can create a lot more content for everyone, because I don't really have the capacity to make heavily edited videos like I used to. So that is really cool. We're going to keep doing this, and we're going to keep producing fun content for you guys to enjoy, and keep producing lore in the Flesh and Blood world, or keep looking at the lore of the Flesh and Blood world. So thank you very much for listening to this video. Thank you very much for listening to this very rambling ending segment. And I will see you guys in the next lore video when we'll talk about Phoenix and the Dragon and Betrayal. See you next time. Goodbye. Amazing.